Learning styles. The learning objectives for this section of the presentation are to develop an awareness that individuals prefer to learn through different methods, to identify your own preferred learning style, and to be able to consider how this information might be applied in the workplace. What is a learning style? There are many different theories and models that have been developed by different psychologists over the last 60 years, trying to describe and categorise how different individuals learn and process new information into knowledge. This list is less than half of the models listed by Cassidy in his article, which is referenced at the side of this slide. This sample of model types is simply to give you an appreciation of the sheer number of different models in circulation and a hint at the types of categorization that the various psychologists have attempted to divide learners into, such as Pavio's verbalizer-visualizer, indicating a division of learners into those who prefer text or speech as compared to images and demonstrations. Despite the vast breadth of study in this area, no one model has significant evidence for being better than all of the others. That is to say that there is no ideal model for categorizing learners. Furthermore, there is a distinct lack of evidence that a person's preferred learning style dictates how they must be taught in order to learn effectively. Therefore, the application of these categories in an educational setting is of dubious value. There is also significant debate over whether a learning style is a trait and therefore constant over time, or dependent on state, that is, that it is variable depending on the situation and may change over time within one individual. But an appreciation of the different methods of learning can be valuable to a teacher or mentor, so we will briefly cover the concept of learning styles and the models used to describe them. To demonstrate the concept of a learning style model, we will explain a couple of them in how they classify learners into different groups. The detail of the models is not important, only the concept that learners can acquire and deal with new information in very different ways. Likewise, as a preceptor, it's not so important that you be able to identify someone else's preferred learning style, but simply that you are able to appreciate that different students will potentially learn best in ways that are different from yourself and from each other. The first learning style that we will look at is Kolb's model. This is a model originally published in 1976, but then improved upon and republished in 1984. Some other learning style models, such as Honey and Mumford's Learning Style Questionnaire, are based on Kolb's work. Kolb described a hypothetical four-stage learning process of thinking, experiencing, doing, and reflecting. He then suggested that learners will favour either experiencing or thinking, and either doing or reflecting. This can then be used to split learners into four groups based on their preferences, and this is summarised in the table on this slide. A preference for experiencing and doing would make you an accommodator. Experiencing and reflecting a diverger. If you preferred thinking and doing, you would be labelled a converger. Thinking and reflecting an assimilator. Kolb describes the characteristics of each of these groups in great detail, but for the purpose of keeping the concept simple, we'll leave it at that. This model demonstrates that by looking at just two variables, thinking versus experiencing, and doing versus reflecting, we've already split a learning population into four. From this, I'm sure that you can appreciate that some of these learning style models become quite complex. Remember that it's not the detail of these models that's important, but the idea that individual learners have different preferences for the way that they learn. To classify learners using Kolb's system, there is a 12-item questionnaire called the Learning Styles Inventory. Fleming's VAK or VARK model. This learning style model is one of the easiest to simplify for a brief workshop, and the questionnaire associated with it is also fairly brief and easy to score, so we will be using this model for you to be able to identify your own preferred learning style. Fleming's VARK model, formerly known as the VAK model, classifies learners on their reliance or preference for each of four areas: visual, oral, read-write, and kinesthetic. This is done by completing a 16-item questionnaire which has been included in this learning package. If you haven't already completed it, please take a few minutes now to fill it in and score yourself using the grid on the final page. Please complete it as honestly as possible. The questionnaire needs to be completed about yourself, not about what other people expect of you. If you answer based on how others do or should perceive you, then this will skew the results. The idea is that you select the answer that matches your preference best. You can select more than one answer if that applies to you, or no answer at all if that is more appropriate. But try not to overthink your answers. Hopefully now you should have a grid on the final page with lots of V's, A's, R's and K's circled. Tally up how many of each you have and calculate your score in the table at the bottom of the page. These letters, V, A, R and K, refer to the 4 categories on this slide. Obviously you receive a score for each area, even if that score is 0. By scoring each area, it means that a learner isn't classified simply as a visual learner, for example, but they can see that relative to the other areas, they have a strong preference towards visual learning, or that they are evenly balanced across all of the areas. Unlike some learning style models that pigeonhole learners as a visual learner, for example, the VARK model score shows where your preference in each area lies relative to the other areas. If you are equally balanced between 2 or more areas, this is classified as being multimodal. So what typifies each type of learner? Visual learners appreciate information being conveyed via charts, diagrams, maps, flowcharts, etc. By graphically depicting information that could have just been words, visual learners are more easily able to comprehend new information. Note that this does not include photographs or movies. Oral learners prefer information to be heard or spoken and often learn best from lectures, group discussions, or talking new concepts through. Read-write learners prefer to receive new information in text format, with the information displayed as words. Kinesthetic learners find that experience and practice, either simulated or real, aids their learning best. This category includes demonstrations and simulations, either real world or video. Reflect for a minute on how accurately your result reflects you. Consider how this affects the way that you choose to obtain and understand new information. Do you like to watch a demonstration, hear a lecture, read an article, or try an activity yourself? Do you think that this has changed for you over time? For example, from when you were a student to now? Did you find yourself thinking, it depends on the situation, while answering these questions? Would you perhaps be a very kinesthetic learner for a very technical task, like pulling apart and reconstructing a printer, but then a very visual learner for a more basic task, like loading that printer with paper? Can you see how different students, or staff for that matter, may respond better or worse to different ways of teaching a task because of their preferred learning style? Consider how your own learning experience might have been made easier if your own teacher or mentor was able and willing to give you an opportunity to learn in your preferred way and not instead insisting on the method that suited their own learning style best. How might you as a learner convey to your teacher or mentor that despite being an intelligent person, you are having difficulty understanding the topic when it is presented visually or orally, for example? Do you think that your student or staff member would feel comfortable telling you that your teaching method made little sense to them, or would they feel stupid? The point here is that even if a learner does know their own preferred learning style, and they probably don't, they probably aren't going to volunteer this information because admitting to you that they didn't understand the concept the first time can be embarrassing. It may therefore be up to you as a mentor to identify when a concept hasn't been understood and consider how you might represent the information in a slightly different way in the hope that it will better suit the learner's preferred style. It is important to remember that these VARK scores reflect how you learn, not how you teach, and that your preferences for how you learn don't necessarily translate into your strengths for learning. The results also reflect how you prefer to learn, not how you prefer to spend your leisure time. You may be a strongly visual learner, but love reading books in your downtime. So, applying learning styles in practice. there is the meshing hypothesis. That is, that educators with a teaching style that matches the student's preferred learning style will be more effective. Intuitively, this makes sense. But there is significant evidence that this is an invalid hypothesis. The good news is that it doesn't matter if the preferred learning style of the student and your own teaching style don't match. The partnership can be successful regardless. But then why consider learning styles at all? A student's preferred learning style might not define what teaching style will be most effective, but it's important to appreciate that not all learners will learn in the same way as you. This helps to resolve the issue of, I was shown how to do it this way and I understood it perfectly. Why don't you get it? It's important to appreciate that a lack of understanding doesn't mean a lack of ability to understand, simply that the information might not have been presented in a way that is logical for the learner, even though it might seem perfectly logical for your own learning style. So how can we apply this new knowledge in the workplace, either for students or staff? The take-home message is that different people will learn in different ways. The detail of the various learning style models is not so important, but the appreciation of differences between learners is important. Using Fleming's VARK categories as a guide, consider the different ways that you could teach a student or new technician how to dispense a prescription using your dispensing program. Visual, they could watch you demonstrate. Oral, you could tell them how to do it. Read-write, you could provide a written step-by-step guide. Kinesthetic, you could let them dispense a prescription while you guide them through the process. Which style do you typically use? In thinking about this, I imagine that most of you have probably concluded that you use most methods concurrently. I doubt that the written step-by-step guide is common practice, but I imagine that it's very common for the student to visually watch the process several times while the pharmacist talks them through the process. Maybe they take notes during this for read-write learners. Then the student can employ kinesthetic learning techniques and attempt the process themselves, probably with you again talking them through the process orally. Unconsciously, you are probably already covering more than one learning style in your mentoring technique. Having students in the workplace is about letting them apply their academic knowledge in the real world and providing an environment where they can do that safely. It's not about teaching, but for pharmacists who want to pass on knowledge, an appreciation of the fact that different people process new knowledge differently can help make the process more rewarding for both parties. So, with your new knowledge of learning styles, if you have a student, or indeed a staff member, who doesn't grasp a new concept after being shown, told, or instructed the first time, what will you do now? Repeat the same steps, i.e. re-demonstrate the process while they watch on, or guide them through the new information in a different way? Hopefully armed with this knowledge of learning style preferences, you will be able to reflect on the teaching process that you used for the first attempt to transfer information, and be able to identify it as visual, oral, read-write or kinesthetic, and then be able to see how you can adapt your second attempt to transfer the knowledge to cover a different method, which hopefully will make sense to the learner. How do you know a student or employee's preferred learning style? It's not always obvious, and they may not even know themselves, or at least they may not be able to put a label on it. They may give you cues, though, on the way that they prefer to learn, by the way that they ask for help. Can you please show me how to put new staples in this? Can you please tell me how to open this? Where are the written instructions for the electric stapler? Can you just talk me through replacing these staples while I do it? What matters most is that you are aware that differences exist and consider altering your methods if necessary to help facilitate the transfer of knowledge. So the take-home messages from this section of the presentation are that individual learners will have different preferred learning styles. It's not essential that you know what their preferred style is, just that you appreciate that presenting information in a different way may help the learner to understand a concept more easily. And consider how you can alter the presentation of new information if it's not understood first try. This may resolve some of the frustration felt if a learner doesn't seem to understand what you think should be a fairly easy concept.